"Mike, you need to get down here right away," he said, sounding anxious. "There are two guys here, dressed like cops, with tactical vests and everything. They're saying they're from the HOA, and they want to inspect the office. They're threatening to fine us for violations, but we have no idea what they're talking about." I could hear the stress in his voice, and I knew something wasn't right. First of all, I had never heard of any HOA involved with our building or business. Second, the idea that anyone would show up uninvited, dressed like law enforcement, and demand an inspection was absurd. "Stay calm, Mark," I said, trying to steady my own nerves. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't let them in, and don't let them intimidate you." I hung up the phone, my mind already working through the possibilities. I knew this wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. These men were trying to use intimidation to gain access, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I had dealt with high-stakes situations before. This one was just different. They weren't going to scare my employees or take control of my business. As I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, I could feel my Navy SEAL training kicking in. I had faced far tougher situations, but protecting my employees and ensuring the integrity of my business was a responsibility I took seriously. I wasn't going to let anyone bully us, no matter who they thought they were. As I pulled into the parking lot, I could see Mark standing near the entrance of the office, looking tense. The two men were still standing there, hovering like they owned the place. They were dressed in tactical gear, black vests with utility belts, and what looked like fake badges clipped to their waistbands. They stood with their arms crossed, watching Mark and a few other employees who were standing by the door, looking clearly uneasy. I could tell from the moment I got out of the truck that something wasn't right. These men weren't law enforcement. They didn't have the proper badges or any legal authority to be making demands. It didn't take a Navy SEAL to know that much. I walked toward Mark, trying to keep my movements calm and controlled. I wasn't going to let these guys know they had rattled anyone. I approached Mark first. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice low but firm. "Mike, these guys just showed up out of nowhere," Mark explained. "They said they were with some HOA I've never heard of. They want to inspect the office and claim we're violating all kinds of rules. They keep threatening fines, but none of us know what violations they're talking about. It's all very vague, and they're pushing hard." I glanced over at the two men again. They were watching me now, but neither made a move toward us. Instead, they waited, clearly expecting me to back down or let them in. But I wasn't about to make it easy for them. "Okay, stay calm," I said to Mark. "We're not letting them inside without a warrant or proper identification. If they try anything, we'll handle it." I turned toward the two men, who were now sizing me up, probably trying to figure out whether I was going to fold. I stood tall, making sure they understood that I wasn't afraid of their little act. I knew intimidation tactics when I saw them, and these guys weren't going to get the best of me. As I stood there facing the two men, I could feel the tension in the air. The taller of the two, the one with the clipboard, took a step forward. He flashed a forced smile, but his eyes were cold. "We're here to conduct a mandatory inspection on behalf of the Greater Simmons Valley HOA," he said, his voice oozing with a false sense of authority. "We've received reports about violations on this property. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to fine you and escalate the situation." I couldn't help but notice how his words were designed to intimidate. They weren't just asking for an inspection, they were trying to bully us into compliance with vague threats of fines. They were using their fake authority to push people around, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. "Listen, I don't know who you two are, but you're not stepping foot in this office without proper documentation," I said, my voice firm but calm. "And if you try to scare any of my employees into complying with some bogus rules, you're going to have a much bigger problem on your hands." The younger enforcer, who hadn't spoken much yet, shifted uncomfortably. He didn't seem as confident as the clipboard guy, and his eyes darted nervously between me and the other employees, who were now standing a few feet away, looking visibly uneasy. "We just want to do our job," the clipboard guy continued, trying to sound authoritative but failing to mask the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "You're in violation, and we have the right to fine you." "That's where you're wrong," I shot back. "You don't have the right to do anything unless you have a warrant or official authorization. So I'm going to ask you to leave my property." He hesitated for a moment, and then the younger enforcer muttered, "We've been told to follow through with these inspections, no matter what." I looked at both of them, my patience running thin. "I don't care who told you. You're trespassing. And I'm not afraid to call the sheriff if you don't leave now. The clipboard guy glanced at his partner, then back at me, clearly deciding whether or not to escalate the situation further. But they were no match for someone who knew how to handle pressure, and it was clear they weren't prepared for me to stand my ground. They tried to bluff, but it was already over. They knew I wasn't going to let them intimidate anyone here. I took a deep breath, staying focused and calm, scanning the situation carefully. I could tell the two fake enforcers weren't sure how to proceed. They had come here expecting a quick win, but now they were facing resistance. And not just any resistance. They were facing someone who had been in high-pressure situations before and wasn't easily intimidated. I turned to my employees, who were still standing by, visibly tense. Everyone stay calm. These men have no right to be here. You don't have to engage with them. Just stay inside the office until I handle this. I gave them a quick, reassuring nod, then turned back to the fake enforcers. My mind raced through the options. The more I looked at them, the clearer it became that they had no legitimate power. There was no official paperwork, no real badges, and no authorization from any real authority. They were just two guys trying to act like they were in charge, and I wasn't going to let them. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice firm but measured. You're here claiming to represent an HOA that I've never heard of, trying to scare my employees into thinking you have the authority to fine us and inspect the office. But you can't even show me any proof of this so-called authority, right? Clipboard guy opened his mouth, probably about to spout more lies, but I cut him off before he could speak. You don't even have a warrant, do you? I said, raising an eyebrow. If you did, you'd be able to show me some kind of official document, right? He hesitated, then forced a smile. We don't need a warrant to perform an inspection. The HOA. Wrong answer, I interrupted. You need a warrant or legal documentation to be here. Otherwise, you're just trespassing, and that's a serious crime. If you don't leave right now, I'll call the sheriff and have you both arrested for impersonating law enforcement. The younger enforcer shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between the clipboard guy and me. It was clear he was starting to realize they had stepped into something far more complicated than they had anticipated. Clipboard guy took a step back, glancing at his partner, then back at me. We're just doing our job, he muttered, though his voice wavered now. He clearly wasn't as confident as he had been earlier. Then your job is about to get a lot harder, I said, already pulling out my phone. I'm calling the sheriff right now. I didn't hesitate. As I dialed the sheriff's department, I could feel the shift in the air. The fake enforcers had been expecting to intimidate us into compliance, but they weren't ready for someone who knew how to handle a situation like this. The phone rang a few times before Deputy Ramirez picked up. Mike, what's going on? He asked, his voice steady but alert. I've got a couple of guys here pretending to be from an HOA, I said quickly, my eyes never leaving the two imposters. They're trying to intimidate my employees, threaten fines, and perform some bogus inspection of the office. I've told them to leave, but they're not backing down. I need you here now. Got it, Mike. I'm sending a unit your way right now. Hold tight and don't engage them any further. I'll be there as soon as I can. I hung up, and the moment I did, I turned back to the two men. They looked slightly more nervous now, realizing that I wasn't bluffing. But they were still trying to hold on to their fake authority, still trying to make me feel like they were in control. You know, you should have left when I told you, I said, my voice calm but firm. You're trespassing, and I'm done with your charade. The sheriff's on the way, and you're about to have a lot of explaining to do. The clipboard guy took a step forward, probably trying to salvage the situation, but I stood my ground. I'm not backing down, I said. If you try to pull anything on my employees again, I will make sure you both face serious consequences. The younger enforcer looked like he wanted to bolt. He was clearly regretting getting involved in this mess, and the sweat on his forehead told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't built for this kind of pressure. Listen, the clipboard guy said, his voice suddenly more conciliatory. We don't want any trouble. We were just. Enough, I snapped, cutting him off. There's no just about it. You've been trying to scare my employees into doing something illegal, and I'm not going to let it slide. Just then, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. The deputies were on their way, and I knew the game was up for these two. As the sirens grew louder, I stood my ground, watching the two fake enforcers closely. The clipboard guy seemed to sense the end was near. He glanced at his partner, who was now visibly fidgeting, but he wasn't making any more demands or threats. His confidence was quickly evaporating. Listen, I said, pulling my phone out once again. You're about to learn what real authority looks like. The sheriff's on his way, and when he gets here, you'll have some serious explaining to do. You can either leave now, or you can wait for the deputies to escort you off the property. Your choice. The younger enforcer looked around nervously, taking a step back. It was clear that he wasn't interested in causing any more trouble. The clipboard guy opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was at a loss for words. I didn't give them the chance to recover. I hit the dial button and immediately called Deputy Ramirez back. Ramirez, they're still here. They haven't left, and now they're just standing around like they don't have a care in the world. Don't worry, Mike. We're on the way, Ramirez said, his voice now more urgent. Hang tight and make sure you don't let them leave until we arrive. I hung up, my eyes never leaving the two men. I could feel the tension building as I waited for the law to arrive. A few seconds later, I heard the screech of tires and the unmistakable sound of the sheriff's cruiser pulling into the parking lot. Deputy Ramirez stepped out of the cruiser first, his stance confident and ready for anything. He was followed by two other deputies who immediately moved to secure the area. I nodded toward the fake enforcers as Ramirez walked toward me. These guys, I said, gesturing toward them, have been impersonating law enforcement and trying to force my employees into complying with some fake HOA rules. They're trying to intimidate us, but I've had enough of it. Ramirez's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement and attempting to extort property owners. Step away from the property. Now, the clipboard guy's face turned pale. You don't understand. We're just doing what we were told. Ramirez didn't flinch. You're not above the law. And now you're going to face the consequences. The two fake enforcers were quickly cuffed and read their rights. It was over for them. But as they were escorted to the patrol car, I couldn't help but think about how many others had probably fallen victim to this scam. They weren't the first to be intimidated like this, and they wouldn't be the last unless we put a stop to it. As the deputies cuffed the two men and began reading them their rights, I could see the weight of the situation settle in on their faces. The fake enforcers were no longer trying to put on an act or throw out empty threats. They were realizing they had been caught red-handed, and the consequences were about to hit them hard. The younger enforcer, his face pale and his eyes wide, looked over at me as he was led to the patrol car. We didn't mean for it to get this far, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. We were just following orders. Karen told us it would be easy money. We didn't think anyone would fight back. I looked at him, feeling a flicker of pity, but I wasn't about to let them off the hook. You should have thought about that before you started harassing people. You're not the victims here. Everyone you've targeted is. The clipboard guy remained silent as he was shoved into the back of the patrol car, but the younger enforcer's face twisted with guilt. I could see the realization finally hitting him that he wasn't just going to get a slap on the wrist. He had been part of something much bigger, and now he was going to face serious charges. Ramirez stood beside me, watching as the deputies secured the men in the patrol cars. Mike, you're right. They may have been small players, but they've been causing a lot of harm, and now we have everything we need to go after the people running this scam. I nodded. We need to take down the whole operation. It's not just about them. It's about Karen Whitaker. She's the one pulling the strings, and we need to make sure she doesn't get away with this. Ramirez turned to one of his deputies. Get in touch with the DA. We need to get this case moving fast. The more we can dig into this, the more we'll uncover. Let's make sure we have all the pieces in place to hit her hard. The deputies were already getting to work, taking the fake enforcer's statements and collecting the evidence. They were building a solid case, and I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. We had exposed their scam, and now it was only a matter of time before the rest of the operation crumbled. With the fake enforcers now in custody, the momentum shifted in our favor. But I knew we weren't done yet. The operation they had been running wasn't something that would be easily shut down. It had likely been in motion for a while, and the person pulling the strings was still out there. I turned to Ramirez, who was on his phone, coordinating with his team. We've got them, but I want to make sure we hit the source of this operation. We need to take down Karen Whitaker and anyone else involved. Ramirez nodded. I'm on it. I've already called in a few favors with the local district attorney's office. We'll move fast on this, but we need to make sure everything we've gathered so far sticks. I watched as the deputies worked quickly to catalog the evidence we had found: false documents, forged signatures, and a stack of fake violation notices, all pointing back to the so-called HOA that Karen Whitaker had been running. It wasn't just a scam. It was a full-blown operation meant to terrorize people into paying illegal fines and handing over their property. I dialed a few numbers myself, some local contacts I'd worked with in the past. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for someone else to take charge. I needed to make sure that Karen couldn't escape and that the rest of the victims were protected. As I spoke to one of my contacts in the legal world, I could hear the urgency in their voice. "Mike, I've seen cases like this before, but this one is bigger. We'll have everything ready for a raid tomorrow morning." "You've done the right thing. Karen's not going to get away with this." I hung up and walked over to where Ramirez was standing, giving him the latest updates. "We've got the DA's office on board, and they're moving fast. They're already prepping for a raid tomorrow. They want to hit her warehouse and offices, and they're going to be taking everything down." Ramirez looked satisfied. "Perfect. Let's get this over with. The sooner we act, the sooner we can stop her from causing any more damage." I could feel the pressure building again, but this time it was different. We were finally in control. Karen Whitaker's reign of terror was coming to an end, and I wasn't going to let her slip away. The next morning, we were all gathered at the sheriff's office, ready to execute the raid on Karen Whitaker's operation. The air was tense with anticipation. I could feel the adrenaline pumping, but this time it was different. I wasn't the one being chased. I wasn't the one being threatened. Today, we were taking control of the situation, and I was determined that no one would be able to escape. Deputy Ramirez and the rest of the team briefed everyone quickly. The plan was simple. We would hit the warehouse first, where we knew the majority of the operation was being run, and then move to her personal office space. There was no time to waste. "We've got a solid case," Ramirez said, his voice calm but urgent. "We've got fake documents, testimony from the enforcers, and everything else we need to take her down. The DA's on board, and they've already issued the warrants. We've got backup from the local SWAT team in case things get messy, but I'm expecting no resistance." I looked around at the team. Everyone was ready. They had seen scams like this before, but this one had a personal touch. Karen Whitaker wasn't just trying to extort money. She was making people's lives miserable for the sake of power and greed. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. "We've got the evidence," I said, stepping forward. "Now it's time to make sure she doesn't slip away. Let's move quickly, and let's make sure no one else gets hurt in the process." The team suited up, the sound of vests being fastened and radios clicking to life filling the air. I could feel the tension building as the minutes ticked by. In just a few moments, we would be confronting Karen Whitaker and bringing her operation to its knees. I felt a certain calmness wash over me as I stood there, ready for whatever would come. This was what I had trained for, taking control, staying calm under pressure, and making sure that the people who had been wronged received justice. The team moved out to their vehicles, and I followed Ramirez's cruiser as we made our way to the warehouse. As we neared the location, the familiar tension in the air grew thicker. It was almost time. As we arrived at the warehouse, the sound of engines rumbling and doors slamming shut echoed in the cold morning air. I could feel my pulse quicken, but my focus remained sharp. The deputies were already in position, crouching behind their vehicles, ready for the signal. We were moments away from confronting Karen Whitaker and dismantling her entire operation. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance, where Ramirez and his team had already taken up positions. We were about to make sure she didn't get the chance to run or destroy any more evidence. Ramirez gave the signal, and the team moved in with military precision. The front doors of the warehouse were kicked open, and we flooded inside, weapons drawn, moving in silence. It felt like something out of a movie, but there was no time for theatrics. We had a job to do. Inside, it was exactly as I'd expected. Rows of file cabinets, computers, and desk stacks filled with documents. This was the nerve center of Karen Whitaker's scam. We quickly spread out, combing through the place as deputies started pulling out bags of fraudulent documents and printing equipment used to create fake HOA violation notices. The scale of it was shocking. She had been running this scam for far longer than any of us had anticipated. "Mike, over here," Ramirez called, his voice steady as he waved me over to a desk piled high with more files. "You need to see this." I walked over to where he was standing and immediately saw what he was holding. An entire folder full of documents with signatures forged, property transfers, and even fake invoices for fines she had sent to residents. The amount of manipulation and deceit that had gone into this operation was beyond belief. Looks like she's been taking over properties, getting people to sign over land under the guise of fines, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. This wasn't just about money. She was trying to take control of entire neighborhoods. Ramirez nodded, his eyes narrowed. We've got enough here to put her away for a long time. Let's keep moving. Just then, one of the deputies came in from the back of the warehouse, holding up a piece of paper. We found a lead on her. She's been hiding in a back office. It's clear she was expecting this. I could feel the tension rise again. Karen knew the raid was coming, but she wasn't prepared for the level of law enforcement that was coming for her. There would be no escape. We moved quickly, heading toward the back office of the warehouse. The deputy who had found the lead was already leading the way, and the rest of the team followed close behind. Every step I took felt heavier, the anticipation building with each passing second. I could almost feel the weight of everything that had been building up, the fake enforcers, the intimidation, the fraud. Everything was finally coming to a head. We reached the back office, and the door was slightly ajar. I could see a faint light flickering inside, the sound of faint rustling coming from within. It was quiet, but the tension was palpable. On my count, Ramirez whispered, his voice low but commanding. 1, 2, 3. He pushed the door open, and we rushed inside, weapons raised and ready. But what we found inside wasn't the confrontation I had expected. Karen Whitaker was standing behind a desk, her arms crossed, her back straight. She was calm, almost too calm, as if she had been waiting for this moment. You really thought you could get away with this? I said, stepping forward. You've been terrorizing people, trying to steal their property, and manipulate the system for your own gain. Karen turned slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. There was no fear in her gaze, just cold, calculated indifference. You think this is over? She asked, her voice smooth and dripping with arrogance. You think taking down a few small-time enforcers is going to stop me? Ramirez stepped forward, his tone firm. It's over, Karen. You're under arrest for fraud, impersonating law enforcement, and extortion. Everything you've built is coming down, and you're going to pay for what you've done. For a moment, Karen didn't speak. She just stood there, her gaze never wavering, as if she were trying to decide whether to fight back or give in. Then, slowly, she sighed and raised her hands. You think you've won? You think this will stop everything? There's more to this than you realize. You're too late. Ramirez and I exchanged a quick glance, and I could see the same realization starting to settle in for both of us. She wasn't just a fraudster. She was a master manipulator. And there was a lot more to her plan than we had uncovered so far. I'm not going to let you intimidate anyone else, I said, stepping closer. You've gone too far. It's over. Karen didn't resist as she was cuffed and escorted out of the office. There was no fight in her anymore, just the cold silence of someone who had been caught. With Karen Whitaker finally in custody, the wheels of justice began to turn quickly. The sheriff's department had all the evidence they needed to press charges, and the district attorney's office was already preparing for a major case. The full extent of her fraudulent operation was beginning to come to light, and it was clear that she had been running a far-reaching scam, preying on vulnerable people and businesses in multiple counties. As we left the warehouse and the team began to secure the rest of the building, I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. The operation that had caused so much harm had been shut down, and Karen Whitaker was no longer a threat to anyone. But there was still more work to do. Mike, you did good, Ramirez said as he approached me, his voice low, but full of respect. This could have gone sideways fast, but you kept a cool head. You helped us make sure the scam didn't spread any further. I nodded, but I wasn't done yet. It's not just about stopping her. It's about making sure no one else falls victim to this kind of thing. We need to expose the full network and make sure people know how far-reaching this scam was. Ramirez agreed, and I could see the determination in his eyes. We'll get the word out. We've already contacted the media, and the DA is preparing for the trial. People will know what she was really up to. In the following weeks, Karen Whitaker's entire operation was exposed. The media picked up the story, and people from all over the region started coming forward, sharing their own experiences with the fake HOA. It wasn't just about the fines and the intimidation. It was about the years of manipulation she had orchestrated to gain control over properties and land. Her network of enforcers, many of whom were just trying to get by, also faced charges for their roles in the scam. The trial was a long, drawn-out process, but it was clear that the evidence was overwhelming. Karen Whitaker was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and impersonating law enforcement. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and her entire fraudulent operation was dismantled. For the first time in a long while, I could finally relax. My employees were safe. The community was safe. And I had helped bring down one of the most sophisticated scams I'd ever encountered. There were no more fake HOA cops threatening my business, no more intimidation tactics, and no more innocent people being pushed around. As I sat in my office one afternoon, watching the news coverage of Karen Whitaker's conviction, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This battle was over. But I also knew that my training, my resolve, and my refusal to back down had made a difference. The work wasn't always easy, but the satisfaction of knowing I had helped protect those who couldn't protect themselves made every moment of it worth it.